Hi, this is Rahman Sheikh. Welcome to Fortnightly Railway Transportation Systems Podcast. I am the host and railway systems specialist working in this industry for 24 years and counting. This podcast is primarily focused on railway experts who have vast amount of experience and contributed greatly to this amazing industry. This is not a technical seminar but focuses on feel good stories, individual journeys, their success and failures, motivating younger generation to kickstart their career in railways and creating a sense of pride for the railway people who devoted their lives on the most environment friendly public transportation. Our guest for this fortnight is Steve Lemon. Steve has recently joined Providence T&I as their director rail. Steve started his professional career in 1986 as a signaling and telecommunications trainee technician in British Rail and later worked as S&T Manager, senior engineer, principal manager, professional head of signaling and control systems in Sydney Trains and program director digital systems in transport for New South Wales. Steve has immense experience after working in different roles in his career. Steve is well known as a people's leader who worked in both public and private sectors in rail network and system strategy and development in Australia and the UK. Steve is a chartered professional engineer and engineering executive specializing in systems thinking and a passionate advocate for the use of technology and innovation to achieve integrated, sustainable, and customer centered outcomes. Hi, Steve. Welcome to Railway Transportation Systems Podcast.
Hi, Rahman. Thanks a lot for inviting me. Great podcast. I'm really glad to be involved with it today. So thanks a lot.
Thank you, Steve. Apart from my brief introduction, can you please tell us your professional transport journey so far?
Yes, and this is probably a little bit of a long answer as well, but I think how my career has actually developed has been really important to me, what I've become as a person and also the kind of work that I do. Because I actually started working in railways when I was 16 as a trainee technician for British Rail in the UK and working in faulting and maintenance in the late 1980s. And so after a few years there, I went to Docklands Light Railway in London, which was in its early days, and I was there for several years. But I went there because I was really interested in newer technologies. And even back then in the late 80s, they had automatic train protection, ATP. They had automatic train operation, ATO. They had automatic train control with a control system with plan, replan capability. It wasn't very sophisticated, but it had all those things. And I was really excited to be involved in that technology. And the experience I got from that was it was quite a small railway when it started. And so I knew most people and what they did in the organisation, particularly the ops staff. And so it started to give me this insight into operations, the control room, the back-end planning, the maintenance in different disciplines. And it really got me thinking in a systems way. Understanding all these other roles, I'm starting to think about how it all works together in the railway network as a whole and what systems thinking is really about. And another important aspect of it was I started in quite a hands-on sort of blue-collar role on the front line. And I did my academic university qualifications later on. And doing that, I think it gave me a sense of, I like the logic and the academic side of understanding things, but I also had that down-to-earth pragmatic experience of thinking, I know what this is going to mean in the real world when you implement this. So I think that's given me like a really balanced perspective where I think about the kind of theory, but I also think about the practical side of it as well. So that was a really good start to my career. And so I moved from there and I got my university qualifications while I was working because I wanted to get into consultancy and do something else as well and see more things. And really, I started doing a bit of consultancy and I ended up kind of moving to Australia eventually 15 years ago. And then after a few years in Australia, I thought, it's actually different here. And so I need to get back on the client side again and see how they run their railways in Australia from that side of things. So I went to Sydney Trains, as you mentioned, as a head of signalling and control systems. And that led me to the kind of push for ETCS level 2 on Sydney Trains and the business case and the program director. And it's been really pivotal to my career and what I'm doing. And so I'm now sort of back on the consultancy side again and really thinking about this 35 years of my career and all the things I've learned. Like, how can I put that to good use, really, and help different clients and jurisdictions to kind of learn some of the lessons and implement some of the things I've seen.
Wow, I should say that's an amazing journey from a signaling technician to director rail. Wow, you are an inspiration to many, Steve.
Yeah, look, it's honestly been a fantastic journey. I really love railways and I love working in railways. And, if I can get through my whole career just working in railways, I'll be delighted.
Yeah, me too. I know you since you were program director with digital systems. You were brilliant at what you do. So my question is, I always want to ask this, but never got an opportunity. So this is the right platform. Can you briefly explain the VNV cycle, especially on the left, that is the BRS and SRS, as a principal or client, what they need to be in control of and how knowledgeable client need to be?
Yeah, look, this is a really interesting question, I think, and there's lots of aspects to it. So I'm not going to try and explain the whole V model, and you know it as well as I do, probably better than me. But that top left corner that's really focused around business requirements and then system requirements. If you actually kind of look up V models online, you'll see a few different variations. But one of the ones you see quite a bit are an actual concept of operations right in the top left corner. And for me, that is a really important thing because when you're doing conventional rail project, people follow a project management sort of approach like Prince 2. And that really is focused around starting with a business case and then developing business requirements and system requirements. And that's great in an isolated project, but in a railway where everything's integrated, everything's connected, it's a system of systems, you actually really need that concept of operations to link your business requirement and have a concept of operations where every project links up to the same concept of operations and every set of business requirements are all related to each other. And I think for me, that top corner is where the client, the principal's expertise really is, and that's where they should focus. You see clients getting right into the weeds of detail of subsystem requirements, and they haven't even got a concept of operations. And, their suppliers, industry, can do subsystem requirements, but they can't do a concept of operations. They don't know how the railway runs. They don't know the intricacies of the operation. So for me, that top left corner is really important. And I think the further you get down the V model, it becomes less and less important that the client knows every last detail. I mean, they have to be an informed client. They can't not understand it at all. But the key for me is they understand the top left concept of operation. And that particularly with new technology, where when they're delivering more of the same, they understand the technology and the requirements in a lot of detail. And in their mindset, that's how we have to do things. They get these new technologies that they don't really understand. They start trying to get into the subsystem requirements at a detailed level. And actually, they need to step back and say, let's get this concept of operations right. Let's get our business requirements right. Let's make sure all the different projects we're doing aggregate together in our system of systems at a concept of operations level. And then let the suppliers worry about the traceability down from systems requirements onwards. So I think, in terms of your answer about the expertise in the client, I think it's really key that even if they know a lot about the detail, they focus on the bit that the clients can't do. And that really is that top left corner of concept of operation and business requirements and how different projects connect to each other and how the system of systems of the whole network, how it's all going to work when all these different projects are implemented and integrated into the existing railway. So for me, that's that key aspect of it, I think.
Wow, great insights, great lessons. I think it's beneficial to everyone who is listening to this. Now, as a client, we know what we want. So, which are the main credentials which client looks at and believes that the contractor can complete the project with ease, apart from looking into the history of the contractors?
Yeah, look, and again, a really interesting question again. I think for some people, my answer might be a bit of a surprise, and it may be because my experience is particularly in the relatively specialised, a lot of my experience anyway, is in the specialised world of sort of signalling and control systems and digital train control technologies. But I think my perspective here would be that the success or failure of a project is rarely dependent on the contractors and the suppliers at all. I know that sounds a bit counterintuitive, but actually, and what I mean by that, in this kind of world, the big suppliers that we deal with, the likes of an Alstom or a Thales or an Hitachi or a Siemens or someone like that, they're incredibly experienced, highly competent organisations, and there aren't really many projects that need those suppliers that they can't deliver successfully. They have the capability of delivering any of the projects they win. They've got the experience. So in terms of judging, what credentials do you judge? You almost don't need to judge the credentials because they can all do the job. The problem is on the client side, and that for me is where it typically goes wrong, is actually the client, how they set up a project, the contract packaging and what their decisions are about how they're going to package things up in the bigger project, and the way they then decide to work with the supplier. So when the project's mobilized, how collaborative is it really going to be? How are they going to incentivize their suppliers? How are they going to deal with claims and disputes? Those kind of things. And when the projects run into difficulties, which these complex projects can often do, how is the client going to respond to that? How are they going to talk to their suppliers? I think in the complex projects world, which we have a lot in rail, we don't spend enough time thinking about the setup of the project and just go with what we've always done. And then as a client, you end up complaining about the supplier's performance on the project when actually it's you, the client, that can more influence the performance. And it's not, a lot of the time, the suppliers are actually trapped within the framework that you've set up to deliver the project. So I think almost counterintuitively in terms of how do you look at, whether suppliers are going to be able to perform, you actually need to look in the mirror and say, how are we going to enable these suppliers to perform? Not how are we going to judge where they're capable of performing? Because, in the industry we work on, you don't get to be an experienced rail supplier without knowing what you're doing. And so most of the time they need to be looking at themselves and saying, how do we enable these already massively experienced and competent organisations to actually deliver? So I think the clients need to look at themselves really a lot of the time in this space.
Wow, beaming insights. I don't know what to say. Lots of giveaways. Thank you, Steve. Thank you for sharing. I never thought about this angle because I was expecting you would say something about the contractors. Wow.
Yeah.
Really great. So now I know what to look after the contractors. After all this, we know who can do it or who is actually responsible for doing that. So what is the smartest way that the client uses to monitor the contractor's work? Apart
Yeah.
from the general project controls and
Yeah.
tools, what are the other ways?
Yeah, look, just because organisations are capable of delivering doesn't mean they will, and it can go wrong and they can do badly. And, the due diligence of the client is we need to make sure we're monitoring the contractor's work. And I think I'm going to focus my answer here around the topic we've been talking about earlier about introducing new systems and new technologies. Because typically with your more conventional infrastructure construction projects, it's relatively easy to monitor how well the client and the contractors are progressing and how good their work is as part of the normal sort of design review process. And in terms of construction, you could almost say, if I want to know how well my supplier is doing and how well they're progressing, I could just look out the window because they're building stuff, visible stuff.
Yeah.
Now, in the kind of projects we've been involved in, that's not so simple. In, your complex railway projects, there's a lot of software-based technologies. And I think the key there is that we understand that these type of technologies, they don't have a linear sort of process where they go from design and then hand over to construction. That means they don't easily fit into the sort of project stage gate process that we want to force on them, because we like these projects that you do the design, you hand it over to construction, then you hand it over to testing. And I think in that context, if you like, trying to monitor contractors' work in that world where you're dealing with software and that kind of development, it's really where what I talked about in the last answer, I think the more collaborative delivery approach becomes so important. So if you can get the client, the operator, maintainer, multiple suppliers working really closely together, and I don't necessarily mean this has to be a formal alliance, but just together in some kind of structured, formal, collaborative environment, then that is how you're going to enable yourself to monitor the progress of the suppliers. If you get together, I mean more than just sharing an office, although that is important as well, but getting everyone working together collaboratively, then when you ask yourself, are we monitoring how the suppliers' work is progressing? We're almost saying, well, we're almost not monitoring because we're actually part of delivering it ourselves. We're all collaboratively working together. We inherently know how it's progressing because we're part of it. So I think that really is important in these type of technologies, because you can't take that sort of stand back approach, let them deliver and then judge how well they're progressing. They tell you they've completed 40% of the software development and you're, well, have they? They think they can catch up later if they're behind. You don't know how to judge it. To me, it's the perfect scenario where you need that collaborative approach to be hand in hand together, and you're part of delivering. You know how well progressed it is. You are absolutely part of it. So I think that's why these complex rail projects with technology really lend themselves to not just lend themselves, but are really important to have a collaborative working relationship with the suppliers, and not that kind of traditional adversarial sort of client supplier hands-off type working environment. Just doesn't work for these kind of projects.
Beautiful. These are really smart ideas, Steve. You have very beautifully explained inclusiveness and collaborativeness. I really like your answers, and very brief as well, to the point. I want to move from projects to operator, because we spoke a lot
Yeah.
about projects right from V&V to the delivery stage. And in the recent Osrail conference and also your recent podcast with Dr. Frank, I heard about those complex and complicated projects.
Yeah.
Now, can you give your valuable suggestions to network operators on how they can maintain such projects with ease after taking over?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, a really interesting question. And I think, again, links as well to the answers I've already given. So I will sound a bit like a bit of a broken record, but I'd say the important thing here for network operators and for, the clients of the delivery organization, if they're separate from the operator maintainers, is understanding that any new project, particularly in the rail world, has got to be integrated into this complex system of systems. And when we say a system of systems, we're not just talking about the technology. We mean people, the process, and the technology, all interdependent, all working together in a kind of, as I said, a system of systems. And I think from that perspective, network operators really need to look and say, okay, we've got our existing ways of working and we've got our how we do things and how we've done things and evolved over the years. Let's look at this new project and understand, how is this going to change our ways of working, or how can we influence the project? What choices do we have around our ways of working or the project that can better fit with our railway and can help this project integrate into our network? And whilst ways of working don't always change dramatically, I think it's important with the very new technologies that you don't just try and shoehorn the new systems and technologies into these legacy ways of working that have evolved over 100 years. And I think me talking about collaborative project delivery environments, it's perfect because it allows the operator maintainer to get involved early. They ensure they understand properly what's being delivered and how it works. They then understand how that can be integrated into their network. They can then look at what new ways of working do we need, what changes to our existing ways of working do we need, what needs to change in our organisation. And that is what is going to set them up for success in actually taking over these projects. So what you're making key is you don't think of things in a conventional infrastructure way where you just get on with delivering the project, collate all the important information, hand it over to the operator maintainer and expect them to kind of manage that for the whole of life. But actually they've been involved from the project from day one, inherently collaboratively part of the team. They absolutely understand the project. They understand how they've got to change their organisation. And that is what I could talk about as operational integration, proper operational integration. And it means they're going to be able to manage these projects And you can almost think of these projects as change projects that introduce new technology and not as technology in projects that include a bit of change. And an obvious example in our world that we've worked together would be with these sort of in-cab signalling systems and technologies, because as an operator maintainer, you need to get involved early and think, okay, in our network, we might have rigid demarcations between signalling, telecoms, the people who work on board the trains, the control systems, and that's not going to work anymore. And the integrated nature of the systems won't allow you to do that in the same way. And so that can have really huge implications for the organization, not just for the roles and the org structures, but for all the processes and procedures that relate to that. And so that's a very complex picture for operational integration. And you can't just come along at the end of a project and expect to be able to pick all that up and change your whole organization. So I think the success going forward of an operator, maintainer, and network manager with a project that's been handed over to them is going to depend on the actual involvement they've had well in advance of that. And so this early operator, maintainer engagement and network manager engagement and involvement in a collaborative environment, that is not just good for successfully delivering the project, but good for the whole of life success of that once it's been integrated in network and you're just managing its whole life. So that, for me, again, brings us back to new technologies need this kind of collaborative environment where people are working together because it's just so complex.
Really great discussion, Steve. And I'm very happy to listen from you because I think in my current project, we're actually following the same steps as you said.
Good.
These are some really great ideas to execute. You know, the amount of knowledge and wisdom you hold, I'm surprised and really keen to know that person who has a tremendous impact on you as a leader. Maybe someone who has been a mentor to you. Why and how did this person impact your life?
Yes. So, look, a good question. I'm going to probably, and I've listened to a few of your podcasts, and I think other people, the same as me before, probably disappoint you by not naming names as such. Because I think for me, I've not had a single mentor over my career, really. And it's, we're talking about more than 35 years. And I've probably had half a dozen or so that stand out, but they're for different reasons. And I think it is important to have different mentors for different things. Sadly, some of these people aren't even around anymore. I wouldn't embarrass the ones that are by naming names, I think. But I think some of them wouldn't even recognize themselves as mentors almost because they're just good leaders or good people. And I think a lesson people can learn and what's had an impact on me is you learn a huge amount from mentors in all positions, people that are your peers, people that are less senior than you. You shouldn't think that you can only learn from these really senior people that, they're doing this job and I want to do that job one day. So I want them to be my mentor so I can follow in their footsteps. Because I think what's more important to me is that, everyone has fantastic, diverse, different insights that you can learn from. And so you need to be open to learning from people all the time. And so for me, that's almost more important, really, or definitely more important. Maybe the thing that I think at least one, again, not naming names, but at least one person you've had on your podcast before said a key message for people is never stop learning. And I think that to me is an absolutely fundamental. When you work with people and who recognize that no matter how long they've worked in an industry, there's always something new and to learn and experience. But if you meet a real expert in the industry, they recognize that even if they know a lot, it's just a tiny fraction of everything and they can never know it all. And so I often recognize someone would be a good mentor because they're not embarrassed about not knowing something. Even if they're a real expert and a legend in the industry, they're not embarrassed about not knowing things. And because they know that the first step is learning new things. To learning new things is not knowing things. You have to not know things to learn things, and you're always learning. And so I think it's a bad sign if you have someone who acts like they know absolutely everything and there's nothing new to learn because they're the expert in everything. The reality is those people have often gone through their career with quite a blinkered approach and not learned much at all, really. And I think so from a mentor point of view, I think always be looking for mentors and don't just look in the obvious places, but be looking to learn from everyone at all levels because people just have so much experience and so much to give. And I think that, to me, is the kind of importance of the mentor role, really, for me.
Well, great answer. Even though you didn't name it, I know it's Warwick Talbot. He's a great leader. People who haven't heard Warwick in my previous podcast, I request them to go and listen to him. He's a great, great mentor.
Warwick is one of several great mentors that I've had in my career, definitely.
And I really like that mentoring program as well, Steve. It's like, let's go do it and not you go do it.
Yeah.
So you grow a lot with all these mentorships and trainings, etc. Thanks for these insights. And what's that one lesson your job has taught you think everyone should learn from some point in their life?
Yeah, so this is actually like a little bit of a bugbear for me, I think, actually. But I think the really important thing for me is the importance of diversity, even though it might sound like a bit of a cliche in the modern day where everyone's talking about diversity. It's easy for people to think that if they're good at their job, that things would be better if there were more people like you. But that is never the case. Absolutely never the case. There's so much evidence of how much more effective diverse teams and organizations genuinely are. And it shouldn't really need saying that, but it still needs to be said. And I actually often hear people who support diversity and talk about supporting diversity, and then in the background, they complain about things like, oh, there's diversity targets in recruitment and it should just be the best person for the job. But I don't think they really understand what the best person for the job actually means, because a job is going to be a role in a team, and the best person for the job can't just be judged by looking at a CV and saying, oh, this person looks better than, because in reality, the best person for the job might not be the one with the most knowledge and experience. Actually, they're the one with enough knowledge and experience to do the job, but then who brings diversity of thinking and approach to the team in a way that makes the team much more high performing. And I think a really key thing that people need to learn is to just look past the kind of just diversity statement, but think really hard about diversity is not just important because it seems fair. And so they're slightly grudgingly going along with it because they know it's the right thing to do, but it's actually fundamentally and inherently better diversity, and it makes teams, it makes projects, it makes whole organizations so much more effective and so much more high performing. And so I think for me, absolute lesson of my career when I started out, if I'm doing my job and I'm doing it well, I think, gosh, if there were more people like me, this would be great. And the real thing I've learned in my career is that is not the case at all. Diversity is the real key to high performing teams and great work environments as well.
Brilliant answer, very effective answer. Not many people would dare to speak just what you just said now. I strongly believe people who heard this, they will message you back telling, hey, thanks, Steve, to tell that.
They should
Because
definitely think about it. That's all I can say.
Correct. Brilliant. Apart from all this discussion we had, Steve, I want to know what you do. Like typically, what is that one thing which you will follow in your daily routine?
Yeah, look, for me, work can be stressful sometimes. We all know that. And potentially it's almost always stressful. And I think if you're really committed to what you're doing and you really believe that what you're doing is purposeful work, it isn't always going to go the way you want it to go. And so it is going to be stressful because you really want it to go well. And so what I've found is, for me personally, and I do get passionate about the work I do, I need something that's a hobby that's completely unrelated to the work that I do. And I've heard a lot of people talk about this kind of thing, and it needs to be a totally distraction, something that's totally absorbing you so you're not thinking of work while you're doing it, and something that really allows you to reset and refresh. So it can be anything. For me, listening to music and vinyl records in particular really helps my mental well-being and really helps me to manage that work stress and kind of have that reset that you need, and then you're back to work and you're feeling refreshed and on top of things again. So that's key for me.
Thanks for sharing, Steve. It's really nice. Even in sometimes when I feel stressed out, I take my motorcycle out and I enjoy the air. It's brilliant. It's a good feeling.
Yeah.
And before I end up, my one last piece of question to you is, what's your one piece of advice to our listeners?
Yeah, so simple bit of advice for me is make sure that you actually enjoy your life and your work. And I'd say enjoy it, don't endure it. That simple message for me is really important. And I like a quote from the American writer and activist, Maya Angelou, who said, my mission in life is not merely to survive, but to thrive, and to do so with some passion, some compassion, some humor, and some style. And for me, that kind of sums up like my advice and how I like to try and live my life.
Wow, it's a vivid idea. I think this word vivid I used even in Warwick's podcast as well. And at last, Steve, from the bottom of my heart, thank you for your time. I really enjoyed recording you, and I really learned today to take something with me.
Yeah, look, thanks
Thank
a
you.
lot. Thanks a lot for having me. I really, really enjoyed it. It was great fun. And I love to talk about work, as you know. So it's another good opportunity. And I'm not, whilst being recorded on the podcast is not my number one thing, I have really enjoyed the experience. So thanks for making it kind of relaxed and enjoyable. It's been great.
Thank you, Steve. I believe everyone listening to this podcast has got something to take away from today's discussion. If you like this podcast, please listen, follow, and share this podcast within your network. If you believe we should be sharing your story or someone within your network, there is a railway leader who should be here sharing his or her contribution to this industry, contact me on railway transportation systems at gmail.com. Thank you for your time today. See you next fortnight. Until then, stay safe and take care of yourself.